The Spurs have a tough decision to make as Stephon Castle's resurgence over the last 2 games is forcing Mitch Johnson into a difficult decision as to what the Spurs starters will look like moving forward, and whether it's Castle over maybe a guy like Vassell. This has big implications for the future of the Spurs backcourt, especially in the post-Chris Paul era. We're going to dive into the recent performances from Castle, Vassell, and how some outlets are even saying this is the time for Castle to take over that starting role. A bunch of great stuff coming up on this episode of Spurs Digest. Plus, we're going to take a look at that rookie ladder. Spurs Grizzlies, last game, next game. There's some head-to-head matchups there, but we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Before we do, guys, I know I ask you every video, but we're so close. We're getting so close to 4,000 subscribers, and 75% of you watching all these videos are not subscribed. Though you guys are subscribing more if you like daily Spurs content. You like all the latest news, rumors, reports, everything for the San Antonio Spurs. This is your home for it. The button down below, it's completely free. Let's dive into this video. And the first thing I want to bring up here is a quote that I found from Pounding the Rock from Charlie Thaddeus. It's a great article that I will link down below. There's a lot of stuff in there, but the section I wanted to talk about is about this recent game against the Grizzlies and Castle's recent play. He says, at what point do we start talking about Castle as a long-term staple in the starting lineup? Are we doing that now? Have we already been doing it? Does Devin need to start coming in with the second unit until we can get his shot going more consistently? Should we not worry about it because we probably need to start planning for life after Chris Paul anyway? Games like the last one, or the one last night, start to beg these types of questions. And I actually think that's a really interesting take because, look, Stephon Castle has been absolutely unbelievable over his last 2 games. And to be fair, so has Devin Vassell. I mean, these two guys are really showing out recently for the Spurs. But there's a lot of talk now about, giving guys maybe more minutes, as we're seeing with Stephon Castle, trying to plan for this post-Chris Paul era, whether that's next year, 2 years, 3 years from now. I don't know, because it seems like Chris Paul is one of those ageless wonders that it feels like he could play forever, doesn't it? But right now, Castle is proving himself as a very, very good player. He's been one of the Spurs' best players, and even in terms of plus-minus over the last few games, he has been one of the better ones on the team. I'll actually dive into that right now, because one of these big decisions for the Spurs starters is whether it'll be Castle over a guy like Vassell, or maybe you move Vassell to the 3, and I don't know. There's a lot of questions you could throw out there. Will Harrison Barnes start coming off the bench? Probably not. Harrison Barnes has actually started every single game he's played in this season. You can look here. I'll make this bigger. Feel free to pause, take a look at yourself. Sorry, I'm cutting off the points for guys like David Duke, Sissoko, Minix, and Ingram. Sorry, not sorry. The more important points are near the top, though I do love those guys. As you can see here, like a guy like Barnes has started all 39 games he's played in. Same with Chris Paul. Wemby's also started in every game. And now that Jeremy Sochan is back, I'm expecting him to start every game. So really, you just kind of have a couple of positions there. You got a guy like Vassell, you got a guy like even Champagnie, and you got a guy like Stephon Castle, all kind of vying for that last little spot in the lineup. Because if you're assuming Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sochan, and Victor Wembanyama are starting every single game, you really only have one other spot. Champagnie has done pretty well in his starting minutes. The dude has had a solid season from 3, though it has dipped a bit from what it was earlier on in the season. Harrison Barnes has been the team's best shooter, I would say, this year. He's shooting 41% on almost 4 attempts a game. Really, really good. But when you're looking at a guy like Vassell and Castle, these are the two guys you're really thinking about in terms of, as the season goes down to the wire, as you start heading towards the playoffs, those are the guys that you're more likely to toss in that 2-guard spot heading into the playoffs. And we've seen Vassell, he's played 11 games off the bench this year, and in those games, he's looked really good when he first was coming back from injury. It's like, dang, he's like that spark 6-man guy. Am I saying that's what he should stay as and you should start Castle over him? Look, I'm going to let you guys decide. I'll give my opinion at the end. Look, at the end of the day, even with his shooting struggles, 44% from the field, 36% from 3, that's not great, but that's not like horrendous, right? It's not like the worst thing in the world, and he seems to be getting more comfortable game by game, and he's the team's second leading scorer. However, if we look at the last 5 games, which is really where, Castle was great, and then he kind of took a bit of a dip. He fell off the rookie ladder, but now he's starting to climb back, and over the last 5, these games against Memphis and LA have been real big turning points for him. Of course, yesterday versus Memphis, 26 points, 4 assists, 3 rebounds. Not ideal shooting from the field. That's still something that he's going to have to work on. So, that's one of those points, like, do we take Vassell off the bench till his shot starts to fall more? I mean, Castle's shots really not been falling this season either. However, though, that game against the Lakers, he was a plus 10. He shot 10 for 16 from the field, 63%. His three-point shot is definitely not at the place that we'd like it to be, but he's putting up the peripherals, and regardless, when you have Castle playing big minutes, you know one thing is you're getting some very, very good perimeter defense. You're getting kind of good defense across the board. I mean, he plays great defense all over the court. So that's an added benefit that you're probably not seeing in the box score. But now we compare that to a guy like Devin Vassell over the last 5 games. I want you to pay attention to the plus minus as well. Well, I mean, looking at the stats, obviously Vassell has been scoring more, but in terms of the efficiencies, man, it's really close. Like 54%, 50%, 24%, 36%, 40%. Castle 43, 63, 17, 44, 40. Like they're pretty close. Again, this is only over the last 5 games, so this is taking a small sample size and really extrapolating it, which I know is not what you should do statistically, right? You got to look at the whole sample size. You got to look at the fit of these players. But again, like the plus minus for Castle, he was positive. He was a +3 in the loss against Milwaukee. He was a +3 in the loss against Chicago. And he was only a -4 in that overtime loss to the Denver Nuggets. While Vassell was a -12 against the Nuggets, despite putting up 19 points. He was a -5 in that loss to Chicago, -9 against Milwaukee. And look, I know, it is a small sample size. I shouldn't probably be looking too much into that. But what I am saying is that this has to start being a question. I think it already has been a question in your guys' minds, in my mind. And I'm just going to come out and say, maybe this is a hot take. I would not be surprised if Castle ended up starting a lot of games down the stretch for this team. Now, my opinion's a little different of the article that I shared earlier. I don't think Castle starts just to take Vassell off the bench until he gets his shot rolling. For a lot of guys like Vassell, more of a volume type scorer, what you really want is this guy to get into his rhythm, to get more shots, right? So, I mean, look, there's 2 sides to this. You play him as a starter and you just let him go shoot the ball, get back into his rhythm. That can help. Or you play him off the bench so he can play against lesser opponents in theory, and then he'll get, more shots or easier shots to find his rhythm. There's pros and cons to both of those. It depends on what the coaching staff, Mitch Johnson, and everyone around the team feels. But I truly think that as the season goes on, if Vassell doesn't get back to where we know he can get, like if his field goal percentage is not climbing back up to around, 48-ish%, his 3-point percentage is sticking in those mid-30s, it would not surprise me to see Castle get some starting minutes as we push towards the playoffs. And in the playoffs, a guy like Castle would be extremely valuable. Again, assuming he would shoot a little bit less or at least take more efficient shots. I mean, look, it's not like he's taking bad shots, right? He can hit those little step back threes. I am of the mind here right now that Stephon Castle has been playing well enough to get into that conversation. And if you look at the depth chart, I mean, who else is he really competing with? I don't think you'll see too much of Champagnie starting over a guy like Castle if, say, Vassell goes out injured, or if you're making that decision to start someone. Like, there's no world that Champagnie replaces Vassell in the starting lineup at this point, I don't think. I think Vassell's played enough, and we know what both of those guys bring. I think Champagnie's great off the bench. But if you have Stephon Castle, look, I'm just saying, I want you guys to leave a comment right now. I've rambled on this for too long. Just let me know, do you think Castle will be starting over Vassell sometime soon? Or maybe even later into the season, like my opinion is? I could be very wrong. You guys might disagree, but I'd love to hear that too. But let's end this video on a nice little positive note here. Not that one. We talked about Devin Booker yesterday. I want to look at this rookie ladder because Stephon Castle, of course, has fallen down compared to where he was earlier in this season. And right now, they have him at number 4 in the recent rookie ladder that came out yesterday before the Spurs Grizzlies game. And let's all be honest with ourselves, Stephon Castle certainly looked better than Jalen Wells in yesterday's game. Now, will that have a direct impact on the rookie ladder? I don't know. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the writers look at that. They're like, well, we had number 3 and 4 go head to head, and especially if Castle in tomorrow's game or today's game, depending on if you're watching this on Friday, if Castle goes head to head with Wells again and looks better again, you might not have a choice but to say, look, I think I got to have Castle over him. Castle's numbers, his averages have dropped, but honestly, he's been performing very well against the Lakers, against the Grizzlies, and I think you could very well see him right back in that top 3 next week. So the love is getting thrown out to Stephon Castle, a guy who's having a good season so far. Again, 39.5 from the field, 25 from 3. Not ideal, but for a rookie, more of a power guard style who can play really solid defense, who's still scoring 11 points a game, who's still, he's not stealing the ball maybe as much as you'd expect, but he's playing solid defense with his body. You're seeing that energy, that effort every single night. That's what I love about Stephon Castle. That's why I think he's going to end up being a long-term starter for this team. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts down below on all the stuff we discussed today, because that'll do it for this episode of Spurs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, guys. We're so close to 4,000 subs, and if you could hit the button down below, we'd really appreciate it. I've been your host, Josh Gosse, and I'll catch you in the next one.